12月6日金曜日、現在は夜の22時25分を回るところになります。本日アメリカの雇用統計がこの後発表されるということで、5分前の今25分ですね、5分前から発表後23時ちょうどまで録画していきたいと思います。現在のレートですが、ユーロドルが 1.36 の57、ドル円が102円の27銭、ユーロ円が139円の69銭、で、オージードルが 0.90 の57で推移しております。12月ということで、今年最後の雇用統計になりますね。で、今回の雇用統計、事前予想出てまして、非農業部門雇用者数ですね。こちらプラスの18万5000で、失業率が 7.2% という事前予想が出ております。前回がですね、非農業部門雇用者数がプラスの20万4000人で、失業率が 7.3% ということだったので、前回よりもちょっと少ないぐらいの予想数字と、あと失業率の方が 0.1 ポイントほど回復するという事前予想にはなってますね。あと参考情報として、水曜日ですね。水曜日に発表された ADP の全国雇用者数、こちらがですね、事前予想がプラスの17万人のところが、プラスの 21.5 万人ということで、かなりいい数字が出てきてまして、あとそうですね、週間の新規失業保険申請件数の数字とかも、合わせて考えると、ちょっと今回は強めの数字が出るんじゃないかという期待が膨らんでいる状況になっております。一応発表前ということで、そうですね、各通貨あまり値動きはないんですけども、ちょっとドル円がここに来てですね、少し、上昇してきてるのかなという感じですね。全体的には、リスクオン相場にはなっていると思うんですけども、ちょっと日経平均がですね、ここ 2,3 日、軟調推移を続けたというのがあって、ちょっとドル円は高値の103円の40銭ぐらいからですかね、ちょっと軟調に推移してきて、今日の雇用統計を迎えるというような形になってますね。逆にユーロドルとか昨日も上げてましたけども、そう全体的に見て、ユーロとドル円、あとクロス円は上げてるにもかかわらず、オージードルが一人負けしているような状況がここ2ヶ月ぐらいずつ続いているのが、ちょっと個人的には気になるところではあるんですけども、今日の、雇用統計がですね、どのような結果になってですね、この後年末相場につながっていくのかっていうのは、ちょっと注目していきたいなと思っているところです。
The chief economist of Mezro Financial is with us. Markets reporter Alex Steele is also monitoring equity futures and how they're going to react to these numbers. And economics editor Mike McKee will put all of this data into context for us. But Diane, as we're waiting these numbers, which are just a few minutes away, I know that your expectations are a little bit lower, though, than what most economists survey are expecting. Why is that?
Well, the economy just doesn't feel like it's a 200,000 a month economy. Now, that doesn't mean we won't get it. The issue is the composition of jobs. I have
あと1分少々で、発表の時間になりますので、ちょっと発表の瞬間をですね、待ちたいと思います。
gains in leisure, hospitality, and particularly in food preparation, those are all minimum wage jobs, and that's not exactly the composition of jobs we need going forward to get a lot of income growth and spending and self-feeding momentum in the U.S. economy.
So Diane, looking ahead to what will happen in 2014, I want to touch upon what you just mentioned. Some are saying that yes, we are likely to get some sort of minimum wage increase. At least that seems to be the momentum right now. Do you expect that to have a big impact on the jobs market?
The issue on the minimum wage issue is, one of the issues is, you remember during the Great Depression is when we saw a lot of unionization. And so when people are living below the poverty level on minimum wage, they're going to be upset about it. The unions have also really linked onto this and are trying to lever that point. The hard part is, of course, every time you raise the price of labor, especially in an area where there's low margin business like fast food or things like that, you're going to lose the number of workers you actually employ as well. So it really is a tough issue right now. just raising the minimum wage, it sounds great on paper to people who want to, increase living standards. But the reality is you could be also cutting a lot of people out of the job market.
It is certainly a very controversial issue right now in Washington. But let me bring in Mike McKee, who is standing by with the whisper number right now, Mike, on the jobs data.
Well, it's potentially a volatile day in the markets because the whisper number is about 200,000 or maybe a little bit over that. The consensus 185. So Betty, if it's much higher or much lower than the consensus, we could see some real market whips.
Okay, we may see that in just a few seconds.
結果が出てきましたね。11月の非農業部門雇用者数がプラスの20万3000人。で、失業率が 7.0% という数字が出てきていますね。予想が 7.2% だったんですけども、失業率が 7.0% ということになってますね。非農業部門雇用者数がプラスの20万3000人。で、失業率が 7.0% という数値になってますね。それに対して初動は、ドル買いの反応ですかね。ドル円上昇してユーロドルがちょっと下落するような、今流れになってきております。非農業部門雇用者数がプラスの 20.3 万人。で、失業率ですね。失業率が 7.0% ということで、非農業部門雇用者数が増えてましたけども、それ以上にちょっと、失業率の低下幅がちょっと大きくなってますね。まだヘッドラインだけなんで何とも言えないんですけども、ちょっとこの結果を見てですね、QE3 の年内、縮小観測っていうのがちょっと強まってくる可能性が出てきたかなという感じかと思われます。
Temporary laid off government employees once again back on the job, no longer listed as unemployed. They were included in that 818,000. So again, some noise here, but it is clean. They were counted both times in October and November. So the number of long-term unemployed essentially unchanged at 4.1 million, 37.3% of the unemployed. But big improvement, obviously, in the household survey. Big hiring numbers for transportation and warehousing up 30.5 thousand. Manufacturing 27,000. Betty, the best month since March of 2012 for manufacturing. Healthcare up 28,000. Construction up 17,000. One area of weakness, financial activities down 3,000. Average hourly earnings 0.2 month over month. Year over year 2%. Average weekly hours up 34.5. Betty, the bottom line here, more improvement, more traction in the labor market. That unemployment rate certainly going to get the attention of the Federal Reserve and start a lot of the taper talk. Betty?
It will, and it's getting the attention of the markets. Alex, what's going on? We're seeing a rally?
A little bit of a rally here, Betty. It seems like stocks are taking good news as good news. A striking chart here for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. You see this spike here just as the number came out. Typically, you might think, well, good jobs number, perhaps the Fed will taper, and that might be negative for stocks, but we're not seeing that play out within the equity market. It is a different story, though, for other asset classes. If you take a look at the Treasury, you can see here the yield rising above 2.9% for the 10-year. Also check in on currencies. It's all about that stronger dollar. If the Fed perhaps tapers, if perhaps the economy is getting better, then the currency will appreciate. You see it rising against the euro, against the yen, as well as against the pound. And if you really want to see where it's playing out, of course, you got to look here at the gold market, typically seen as a hedge against inflation based on some kind of stimulus. And you can see here a big dip down for gold on these positive numbers. Betty?
Okay, Alex, I want to bring in Mike now. Mike, is there a reason to be excited by these numbers?
There are a couple of reasons to be excited. First of all, the whole report is good, at least in terms of direction. Some of the numbers not up to where they were prior to the government shutdown, like the participation rate, but still we're going in the right direction. You want to look at, as always, the revisions. This is not as good as we, or at least some people on Wall Street might have thought. Only 8,000 additional jobs were found in the prior 2 months. Now, October could again be revised higher next month. But when you're starting from a higher base, that's at least good news. And we should point out that so far this year, we are tracking to have the best year of job creation since 2005. Hard to believe, a lot of lumpiness in the jobs numbers. Didn't seem spectacular, but it's been a pretty good year. Then take a look at the labor force. Labor force rises, but the unemployment rate goes down. So the number is a good number, and that's because the number of people who were hired in the household survey, extremely strong, 818,000. You have to wonder if that can continue, but it is really good news. Also good news that earnings went up, but they didn't go up enough, only 0.2% on an annual basis. they actually went down from 2.2 to 2%. But then
雇用統計発表を受けてですね、ちょっとドル買いの流れ強まってきてますかね。同時ドルが 0.90 割りましたね。ドル買いの流れが優勢になって今 0.89 の92まで下げてますね。昨日も何回かトライしてたんですけども 0.90 割れっていうのを結局割れずに戻されてきてましたけども、今日は雇用統計の結果を受けてですね、ドル買いの流れが強まって、その流れで今現在 0.90 を割っている状況で推移しております。
That was a big gain. We saw jobs in construction as well, very important to the Federal Reserve. Also, remember what the preconditions for the Fed were on tapering was one, fiscal uncertainty, which we do look like we're going to get some kind of a 21-month deal in terms of avoiding the 2014 sequestration, and we're not going to have the big showdown, hopefully, that we did. Yeah. That takes that off the table for the Fed, and we're back to those numbers of 200,000 a month, basically that they said they wanted to see to justify tapering. So I think, we're really easily 50-50 on tapering in December, and maybe even a little higher percentage than that. This number it's not the only number out there, but it's a big number.
Well, and Diane,
it's really important.
Does it mean also that we are going to see a 6% unemployment rate sometime in 2014?
We certainly could. I don't think we're going to get there, but even if we do, the Fed's not going to take away this stimulus anytime soon. One of the messages that the Fed's going to do is it pivots away from buying asset purchases, is lower short-term rates for much longer. I think we're going to see a zero short-term rate on the Fed funds rate well into 2015, maybe into 2016, and that is something the Fed is going to be having to communicate as they do this pivot away from buying asset purchases. They're still going to have a very large balance sheet, and they're still very concerned about the housing market out there. Those construction jobs, we're seeing state and local governments come back. They were building, but the private sector wasn't. It's kind of ironic, is the biggest drag on the U.S. economy in recent years has been state and local governments. Now they're coming back. That's a plus, but we really want to see the churn in the private sector as well, and that's still yet to be seen, particularly in single-family housing starts.
Peter, tell us about the government shutdown and what impact it might have had on these numbers.
Well, again, just want to walk through. It's really what you got to think about, Betty, is that if the government shutdown hadn't happened, it appears right now we would still be at 7% unemployment. Those workers, had they stayed on the job. What's significant here about the shutdown is the velocity of this drop in the unemployment rate from 7.3 to 7% in one single month. The reason for that is largely because of the temporary laid-off workers, those furloughed federal workers, returning to the job, once again being counted in the household survey as employed. That's why we moved so quickly, but the bottom line for Ben Bernanke and those at the Fed is that we would have been, again, according to these numbers, at 7% anyway if the shutdown hadn't happened. It suggests there was other hiring in the period, not just those government workers going back on the job.
All right, everybody wants to know what the Fed is going to do, and Fed officials have said, as Diane pointed out, that they not only want to see an improvement in the labor market, but they want to know that it's going to continue, that there's some strength in the economy behind it. So my question, Diane, is there that strength? I mean, they're not going to have a lot of numbers between now and the meeting on the 18th to determine that, but is there enough strength for them to even consider it at this point?
There isn't a lot of strength. You already pointed out earlier in the show, 1% likely on the fourth quarter. And that certainly is a problem. Worries about the housing market are very high on the Fed's list of concerns. That said, there is a real sense within the Federal Reserve that the efficacy of these asset purchases isn't there, that they think they'll be much more effective by extending the period of time that they keep the zero rate into late 2015, early 2016. So even though they're still very concerned about the improvement in the self-feeding momentum, particularly in the private sector, and how much we can have of that, there is also a real desire to get away from these asset purchases. Remember, we have a deficit that's falling like a rock right now. New Treasury issuances are falling, and mortgage originations are falling. So the Fed is not only a 500-pound gorilla in those markets, they're now the only gorilla in the jungle buying in those markets, and that's something they're concerned about as well.
All right, Diane, thank you so much for joining us through these numbers. Diane Swank, Chief Economist of Mesro Financial. Also to Bloomberg Economics Editor Mike McKee, our Chief Washington Correspondent Peter Cook, and Bloomberg Markets reporter Alex Steele, who's been keeping our eye on the markets. Remember that we're really going to be focused on this big drop we've seen in the jobless rate down to 7%. We're also going to get reaction to today's jobs report from the CEO of one of the world's largest bond funds, that is PIMCO. Mohamed El-Arian. And we'll get the Obama administration's reaction to the numbers from Labor Secretary Tom Perez. Well, it seemed like the whisper numbers were right. We got a huge surprise on the upside for jobs. We had 203,000 jobs. And also the jobs rate went down to 7%. Now that is significant. I want to bring in someone who lives for jobs days. He loves these days because the data tell the story. Bloomberg surveillance host
story, yeah.
Tom Keene is with us. You just talked to Bill Gross.
Well, I talked to Bill Gross. Before I get to that, I want to make clear this is a sport. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. Just before the report, I put out my last guess, which was 205,000, and that was everybody, all boats rising, lifting up in this.
Hey, who's bragging now?
Well, no, I'm not. It's not my point. It's Drew Mattis at UBS nailing the unemployment rate, as you mentioned, Betty, of 7.0%. I just spoke with Mr. Gross. This with yields going up, which is not good for his total return portfolio. Bill Gross reaffirmed the new normal. He feels that Chairman Yellen will work within a subdued GDP. And with that, he said a 50-50 chance of taper in December, which is why you see the markets moving today, gold moving down $10, $13, and you see yields moving up, bond prices down, and equities come up as well.
Peter Cook, our chief Washington correspondent at the Labor Department, he's standing by. Peter, give us the political implications of this report, particularly as Congress is trying to get a budget deal together.
Well, I think there will be an impact on the budget negotiations in the sense that people think if they get a deal right now, that this steady progress being made in the labor market will only be helped if they can create some certainty here in Washington with a deal, a spending deal that lasts perhaps 2 years. That's been one of the calling cards, if you will, from both sides during the course of these negotiations. Let's lift the cloud of uncertainty coming from Washington, even modestly with this small budget deal. This certainly will add to that effort and makes you think, Betty, if we hadn't had the government shutdown, if we hadn't had all that noise back in October, would this number have been even better?
Yeah, Peter, that's an incredibly important idea here, is how the government got in the way. And the question, Matthew Dowd on earlier today, our Bloomberg political analyst,
雇用統計発表から15分経過しましたけども、現在のレートはですね、ユーロドルが 1.36 の56、ドル円が102円の73銭、ユーロ円が140円の25銭、でオージードルが 0.90 の28で推移しております。発表直後はですね、ドル買いの推移というかドル買い優勢だったんですけども、ちょっとストレート通貨ではドル買いの流れがちょっと止まってきてますかね。ドル円とユーロ円、クロス円ですね、相変わらず上がってるんですけども、対ドルで見た時のドル買いの流れがちょっとなくなってきたというか、全体的にリスクオン相場的な感じになって、ちょっと各通貨全部上げにかかっているような、今そういう形になってますね。で、そんな中で、ユーロ円ですね、今140円の27銭ですけども、これ年初来高値、更新してますね。更新中ですね。140円乗せてきて、年初来高値を今どんどん更新しているような、状況になっております。先ほどからずっとお伝えしてますけども、今月の、アメリカの雇用統計、非農業部門雇用者数が、プラスの 20.3 万人、失業率が 7.0% ということで、予想はですね、プラスの18万5000と 7.2% だったので、両方ともいい、数字でしたね。それを受けての相場ということになるんですけども、発表直後はドル買いの流れにはなってたんですけども、ちょっとここに来てですね、全体的にリスクオン相場になって上げにかかっているような状況になってきてますね。ドル円とクロス円は相変わらず発表直後からずっと上げてるんですけども、ドルストレートですねが発表直後は下げてたんですけども、ここに来てですね、下げ幅を縮小してきてますので、かなりいい数字が出たということでですね、全体的にちょっと上げにかかっているような、なんかそういう感じの相場かなという状況になっております。
Well, it's a tale of two Mexicos. One is about tourism. Millions of travelers, many of them Americans, flocking to the country to play on the beaches of Cancun, Los Cabos, and other coastal areas. Hyatt Hotels opening 2 new resorts in Mexico, and Starwood Hotels plans to up its luxury portfolio there by 50%. On the flip side, though, there is the Mexico plagued by drug violence and crime. According to the latest numbers from the UN, there are 24 murders per every 100,000 people in Mexico. Compare that to just 4.7 in the United States. That has tourism advocates in Mexico fighting to get the truth out about their country, including Erica Garcia, the CEO of travel booking company Yucatan Holidays. Erica, thank you so much for joining us. And do you feel that there is this disproportionate amount of attention paid on drug violence in Mexico, and is that hurting your business?
Yes. I feel that that happened in the past because the previous federal government and the president had an agenda that had to do with getting his party reelected, about talking about crime every day.
Right.
So that got the media attention. However, and it hindered in the last years. However, the truth is that right now there is no particular warning from the U.S. government towards any of the areas of Mexico. In fact, the only warning that they have is a little bit of Mazatlan because it's near the border. But the rest of it, there is no warning.
So you're saying, so the impression is that there is this travel warning issued by the State Department, generally speaking, on Mexico, but you're saying that that's not true, obviously.
Correct. Right now, there is no current warning. When it was in the past, it did affect us, but it was more about perception. The new campaign of Enrique Peña Nieto has helped a lot in terms of perception because we are saying all the positive things that are happening in Mexico, which is there's job creation. For instance, you were talking earlier about jobs. 6 million jobs in the United States depend on tourism and the trade with Mexico, so we're very happy about that.
Right.
And definitely we are a great partner now.
Erica, I know that part of the problem, I think, though, is that is that there are so many different numbers that are out about what is actually going on, with violence in Mexico. You hear the anecdotal news stories that are horrific to hear. But even the latest numbers are only from 2011. So why aren't there more current numbers, crime statistics, to ease maybe perhaps people's concerns that crime is on the rise?
There is actually no crime on the rise. I am not an expert on crime, but I do have to promote Cancun and Riviera Maya all over the world. And I can tell you that Mexico is safe for tourism. Mexico City, for instance, is one of the top 12 safest cities in the world. In fact, we are currently right now helping Sao Paulo and Brazil for the World Cup because we have a center called C4, almost like CSI, that has cameras all over and help. So we're actually helping Sao Paulo, and here they are having this big sport event, and they were not really ready. Cancun and Riviera Maya has always been safe for the last 45 years of its conception.
Right.
We have had an isolated 1 to 4 issues in the last 32 years of murder or et cetera, and it's not related to tourism, which is what's interesting. One thing are the figures that are relating to murder in general as a country, and
Erica,
another thing are the figures that are relating to tourism.
All right, Erica, we have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us. Erica Garcia, the CEO of Yucatan Holidays. We'll be back in 2 minutes on another. It is 56 minutes past the hour, which means Bloomberg Television is on the markets. Equity futures got a little bit of a tick higher after the jobs report came in better than expected, over 200,000 jobs created, but also the jobless rate coming down to 7%. That was the surprise, and you can see equity futures are building on that rally. We are on the markets again in 30 minutes, and we'll talk about jobs with PIMCO's CEO. He'll weigh in on everything from the jobs report to the death of Nelson Mandela. That is Mohamed El-Arian in just a few moments.